Layla Khoury-Hanhold. It is so lovely to have you on the show today. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here.
Yeah. Can you tell folks a little bit about who you are and what is filling up your world with fun these days?
I love the way that you phrased that because I'm trying to focus more on who I am and how I be instead of what I do and all the other prescribed roles that I fall into. But my answer will probably be a mix of both of those things. I am a writer. I my day job is writing about food and travel and lifestyle. I'm an aspiring memoirist. I'm currently working on the first draft of my manuscript, which is really exciting, and I'm nearing revision. And I lead with both of those things because I've really identified that my purpose in life is to serve others with my words, both written and spoken, which is why it's doubly wonderful to get to be on your podcast and share a bit more about me and my experience. Um, I was born in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, but I lived all around the world growing up. So, I always find it challenging to answer the question, where are you from? And, we're all from all different places and made up of different people and experiences. So it's maybe hard for everybody. But in a nutshell, I lived in Tunisia, the Congo, Paris, France, Aberdeen, Scotland, Jakarta, Indonesia, Iron Mountain, Michigan, and then went to school in Upper Michigan at Northern Michigan University, and then moved to Paris for fashion school. So I have a lot of different backgrounds and experiences um, that make up who I am. And the through line through all of that really is food. I discovered my voice as a writer, taking memoir writing classes in New York, where I lived for 9 years. That was 12 plus years ago, but all my stories revolved around food and the places that I had lived. And it's something that I'm exploring in more detail in my memoir, which has been both really, really fun and tender, looking back and really seeing all of the sides of that experience. And I am a wife and a mother. My husband, Matt, and I have been married for 16 years. He's a golf pro. Um, he's not on tour with Tiger Woods. He's always quick to point out that caveat. Our daughter Ava is 5.5. She's in kindergarten, and our fur baby Bella is a chocolate lab, and she is 7.
Ah,
And we live in Roanoke, Virginia, which is a lovely town in the valley of the Blue Ridge Mountains. We've been here 3 years, and we moved quite a bit before landing here as well. So that seems to be another theme, but I
mhm.
hope that this is home for us, at least for a little bit. But we lived in outside Raleigh, North Carolina for a year and a half. And so I feel the North Carolina connection to you, Alicia, as well.
Yeah, well, I helped open the Fresh Market Roanoke store, actually.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. Right out of college, I worked for the Fresh Market for about 4 years. I was started as a cashier, kind of worked my way up to front end manager, and then helped open some of the stores. And so I got to spend a week in Roanoke. I didn't see much of Roanoke because
I'm
I spent
sure you
like
did.
yeah, spent like 60 hours at that store. There's so many parts of your story I'm excited to kind of dig into, but I given that you are writing a memoir and that the through line is food, I'm curious what you think it is about food that is so connecting.
Gosh, I think there are so many different ways, and it's at once universal and very personal. And I think for me, food was, I'm very privileged and fortunate. Food was a constant for me. It was something that was always present and valued. My family of origin is Lebanese. And so no matter where in the world we were living, we would return to the US and spend time at my sita's house, and always gathering around the table for a meal. And I feel like that table and sitting at her table and being fed and cooked for, and food as a love language, is what really centered that connection to food for me. Her table was somewhere predictable that we could reliably land each summer, and you didn't have to earn your place at the table or do anything except pull up a chair and eat, and the more the better, which is endearing and also troublesome in some ways, as I'm finding out. And I think for me too, it was the way that I really understood the different places that we lived, the people, and that was something that my parents instilled in me. They love to travel and go out to eat and recreate recipes, and I just think, there's such a common thread that we all have, through food, the ways in which we eat or don't eat. And I think for me, one of the complicated parts is that food is this really deeply rooted connection point for me. But I think at a certain point, it was also a replacement for actual connection to, primarily my father, who traveled a lot for work. But we always had these really special experiences around food. And I think that's partly why it became so important to me. But I think, later as an adult, maybe food was something that I turned to for other reasons, whether it was stress or stuffing down shame or swallowing resentment, in different facets of my adult life. And so, it's only now that I'm really able to uncover the connection and also the disconnect, and repairing my relationship to how I feed myself in a very literal and metaphorical sense.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I can't wait to read your memoir. I'm so excited about it.
Me too.
I know how intense it is to write a book.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So an interesting thing that came up in Raw today in the morning writing group that I facilitate is I've given myself this project. It's a really personal project of I am creating an oracle card for this year for 12 of my ancestors. So I picked 12 of my ancestors who have passed away, and I put all of their names into the hat at the beginning of the year. And I picked one for each month of the upcoming year.
Oh,
and
wow.
I'm watercoloring their picture. So I'm not a horrible drawing artist, but I'm not great drawing artist. So I'm literally like tracing their picture from a photo onto a card and then just painting it. And my intention with doing one a month was that trying to gather stories from relatives about these folks, as well as like spend some time meditating on who I believe that person to be, even if it's not someone I knew. And I feel super connected to a great grandmother of mine who's from Belgium. And she is, her name's Marie, and her maiden name was de Simpler before she married into the Wilfert clan. And I have two of her aprons. And when I was baking that first year of the pandemic, I was doing a ton of sourdough baking. I felt her presence like strongly. It was the weirdest thing. I just felt like this woman was like showing up in my life. And I finished her picture yesterday and I sent it to my uncles and I asked for some picture or some stories. And they said, well, she was a master baker, which I did know that, but she was a master baker. And I guess she would roast a chicken every Sunday. And that's something I'm really called to do. And it turns out she was the shrewdest businesswoman of the family. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know we had businesswomen in our family.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but it was definitely that like the food piece where I feel so connected to her, of the baking and the the chickens and, roasting a chicken. And I've been a vegetarian, and sometimes during those vegetarian years, I've roasted chickens. And I'm like, oh, I get where this need to do this on Sundays comes from.
That's
And I didn't even
wild.
know.
Yeah. It's
So
so
this,
interesting, isn't it? What comes up for us. And you know, I also inherited my Lebanese grandmother's aprons. And you know, I recently wrote an essay for Food 52 for my family recipe column. And you know, I also jumped on the sourdough train during the pandemic. And you know, when my grandma always made pita bread for all of our meals. And so when I had my hands in the dough, I too could feel her presence. And it was almost like, my hands instinctively knew what to do. And it just felt so natural, even though it felt like this really intimidating cooking project. And I've had her pita bread recipe for, well over a decade, and I've never made it, even though I'm a fairly confident home cook and I do recipe development and product testing, and love to eat. And, I don't typically shy away from anything in the kitchen realm. Um, but I only made her pita bread for the first time this year, and I'm turning 40 in a couple months. And I just felt this urge to make it and to finally, you know, I wear her aprons often. I mean, I think that also makes me feel like a more confident cook when I'm in the kitchen. And um, yeah, there was something just so freeing and natural about making the pita bread and learning to trust my instinct. And I ended up having to blend two recipes. The first one, it made for very rich storytelling because, it didn't turn out perfectly the first time.
Mm,
And the pita was more like crackers. And apparently many people in my family, it's, trialed by crackers first, and then you get it. But I think part of it was, I have also inherited her perfectionism, and I was afraid of not getting it right and not doing her justice. And, I started to think more about all the things that we inherit when we inherit a family heirloom, like an apron or a recipe. And so that really has been, it was such a wonderful experience. And I didn't anticipate how proud it would make my mom to be able to carry on this legacy, as the fifth generation of pita bakers. And, I really felt like it was sort of freeing in a way to make the recipe my own and have the confidence to do that, and also to make this expression of love and nourishment for my family too. Um, so I can totally connect to the bread baking and the presence. It wasn't so far as like, something took over my hands, but it did feel like it was something that was just part of my fabric and part of my DNA.
yeah.
So I'm thrilled that you also had that experience.
It makes me wonder, it would be so cool to do a whole book series of women wearing aprons from their ancestors
Oh
as
my
they
gosh.
bake
Yes.
recipes. And like, here, look, we're coming up with book ideas. And
I know it can be your next or your next book.
yeah. I'm I'm curious about where you are in your book writing journey right now with the memoir. I know you've been working on it for a little while, and I'm just really, I think that so many of us have a desire to write a book.
Mm.
And it seems like the Yoke and Abundance community attracts authors and aspiring authors. And I know how hard and challenging the process can be. And I'm curious where you are and if you would like to share any of where you are in your process right now.
Yeah, I would love to. It is something that, sort of started with these memoir writing classes in New York, 12 plus years ago. but it started really as just wanting to capture these memories. And I would say it's just been in the last couple of years where I've really worked on it in earnest, and really more so in the last few months. So I am nearing the end of my first draft, and am getting excited about revision. Moving into a second draft, I feel like a lot of the themes and structure have started to gel in a new way. I think that part of it was really challenging because the book was still writing me, and a lot of what I'm writing about hadn't happened yet. And so, I couldn't have written it any sooner. And I think as someone who's, an overachiever and, wants to have tangible benchmarks, it can feel really nebulous to just let that go and not be like, well, I have this idea, I'm going to pitch a book, I'm going to query agents, and then, realizing like, I don't even know what my book is, and I really need to finish writing it first, was humbling. And the game changer for me has been taking this class with Rachel Herron called 90 Days to Done. And the goal is to write a first draft of your memoir or book project. They're all different genres in the class, actually. But it's really setting the intention and goals in a very supported, structured class, where you have people cheering you on and commiserating and celebrating. And, it's a lot about the accountability piece, because I consider myself disciplined, but it's really easy to not show up still sometimes. And every student gets a 30-minute hot seat, and I had mine last night. So the instructor asks you questions about your book, and I was amazed at how I was able to talk about the whole book and what happens and what it means and what my character arc is, and to really have that opportunity to reflect on all the progress that I've made and to see how far I've come, and that I do have a story here. And I feel really excited about it. It's still, there's always the self-critic that's like, who wants to hear this? Or, why is this a good idea? And why am I making myself crazy? And, I keep coming back to my purpose is to serve others with my words. And I think I've moved away from writing this book for myself to writing this book for my readers, for other people, because it's going to help them. And there's room for everybody's voice and everybody's story, I think. And, it sounds sort of cliche, but if it touches or helps even just one person, then it matters. And it just feels like very important work. One really great takeaway so far from the class has been that, it's very challenging to just accept that all first drafts are crappy, and that, you just keep writing forward. You don't go back and revise and get attached to the material. And you just keep getting the bones down. And that's, all you need for the next phase, which is revision. And you can make it better later, but it can feel really uncomfortable to like, aspire and know where your writing can be, and to be like delivering here, there's a big gap. And she talks about Ira Glass and the gap, which I won't get into here, because the best thing she said was, the only difference between someone who's published a book and someone who hasn't is that the person who published a book kept going.
Mm.
And I think sometimes we get so hung up on like, is my writing good enough? Am I good enough? And being good enough and worth is the big theme of my book. And I think letting go of that in some respect, and just believing in yourself. You and I have talked a lot about faith, and that has been my word for the year that I outlined in January. And a few months in, like, it's just cultivating that consistency of showing up for yourself, for what you believe is your purpose, because I know that it is to serve others. And so that fuels me to just keep going and trust to that the writing and the words will come, and I'll have time to polish them and make them pretty later, and I'll benefit from working with an editor, and that, it will get to the level that I want it to be at, but not to hold that up as the ideal and, strive for this perfection, because that also is unattainable, and is also something I work through throughout the course of the book.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I was really struck. There was so much I didn't understand about the publishing process. And one, I guess we're all deadline writers, right? Even though, like, when you have a deadline, you meet it. Most of us do anyway. So we're all kind of deadline writers. Writing in community was a really important thing for me as well. And none of the writing process looked like I would imagine that it was going to look, I guess. And a big part of that was the writing in community piece, but especially the program that I did, we wrote our well-structured shitty first draft first. They said the most important thing was the structure. You can build on everything else, right?
Yes. The elusive structure. It's going to plague me to the end. I just know it.
Structure. So after that shitty first draft gets submitted, and we had a developmental editor that would look at our work and give us feedback, but we weren't supposed to go back and edit that feedback. We were just supposed to incorporate it into the future chapters. And then we submitted all of that to an outside reader whose job is to read first drafts of books and say, okay, you might want to restructure this here or there, or like you might want to fill this in a little bit more, like this is what I would focus on in your rewrites. And then we were supposed to start revising based on all of the editing that we'd gotten from our developmental editor and the feedback from that outside reader. And so you start revising, and then you send it to your marketings and revisions editor as well as beta readers. So at that point, you have to that's the scariest thing, is like, here's my undone baby, still growing eyes and ears and hair.
Right.
Like, please read this and give me your critical feedback.
It's such a vulnerable thing. It really is. I think it takes tremendous courage too. And I was floored to learn how slow the publishing process is and all the steps in between. But for me, it was just, you got to write the thing first. So it's been so amazing to witness your journey too. And I just think it's, everybody finds their own path to how they want to, have their book come out into the world. And there is no one right way. And I think sometimes it's easy to get wrapped up in, the quote unquote traditional or, perceived better than, I think I really would like to work with an agent and an editor. And that's something that I feel I would really benefit from going that route. But I am not ruling out self-publishing. People say it's going to take as long as it's going to take, but I think at a certain point, is the world better served having your work in it? And I think relinquishing some of that control is also really a vital part of the process. And I think one that people don't necessarily talk about, because you think you have all this control, but you don't know what's going to be hot. You don't know what agents are really, really looking for, what publishers are going to pick up, or why something does really well. And so for me, I've tried to let go of some of the, control around, if I have a big enough platform, if I publish enough personal essays, if I do this, this, and this. Whereas if I really just dial it back and distill it to the basics of, I have this story that I want to write and I want to share, and I'm writing it for these readers and this audience, then I'm having faith, cultivating, trying to have faith that the rest will fall into place. I had another writing instructor, Sue Shapiro, say that, you do something well long enough, someone's going to notice. And I just take such stock in that.
Yeah. And I would agree with you. I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that one path is better than the other path. The thing that I will say around that, though, is traditional publishing has so much gatekeeping involved in it.
Yes.
And that's kind of the antithesis of what I try for. And anytime I've been up against something that has gatekeeping, I normally don't make it through the gate. So I
Go around. You
so I go
forge your own
around.
path.
I find my own path, right? Like it's why I have a podcast. It's I all of the things. So that's part of why I'm very attracted to the hybrid model of supported, like, publishing companies that are also married with a like almost a self-publishing model where they take the best of both worlds. And and one is not better than the other. They're just different, and they accomplish different things. And like you said, the most important thing is that our messages get out into the world. The stories that we share get out into the world, and done is better than not done. I'll share a really vulnerable story. Actually, I have been getting really great praise on the book and from really amazing folks. And what happens is, at least the way my hybrid publishing company works, is that it's my responsibility to reach out to people to ask for early praise / feedback. And when you ask for early praise, you are basically asking for criticism. So yeah. So I had one person who I respect very gently get on a call with me and said, after she received it, and she said, so I've received quite a bit of good, but this is now what will be standing out forever in my mind. It doesn't matter that I've gotten like 10 great praises back. This one thing where she said, Alisha, she said, your writing is so much better than your editor and the editing that I think you received on this. And I would not publish this if I were you. And I said, thank you so much. And I appreciate that. And it's okay if you can't give me feedback, if you don't want your name on this. I'm proud of this. And I think this story needs to be in the world. And 80% is good enough. And, I think that, and I said that to her, I was strong enough in my conviction of, I am proud of the work that I just put together. Is it perfect? No book is perfect. And that as you start writing and as you start publishing, that's what you realize is like all books have flaws in them in some way. And just because someone is published, we shouldn't put them or their work on a pedestal, no matter what it is. We can love it and we can enjoy it, but recognizing that no book is perfect. There's going to be something in all of them. And that message of waiting for it to be perfect is completely the opposite of what I believe in. So I believe so firmly in the and especially women not waiting for perfect, but getting their messages out in the world. Like, there are parts of my book that are really good. And are there parts that I could have waited until I got it perfect? Sure. But does that mean that it might not have ever been published? Yes.
Yeah. You just keep going. And I think I'm filing that away for future me, because I think it's so easy to feel like you have to keep going until you've like polished it to like the highest sheen possible. And obviously you want to publish something that you feel proud of and good about. And, I think that's where having such a strong relationship with your intuition, to know that you can trust your gut check and to know if you feel good about it, is so important. And the word conviction came to mind for me as well as you were describing that. And I think that's a real testament to your own growth and strength, to be able to, on a phone call and in the moment, be able to respond in the way in which you did. And I think that's such a beautiful example and something that, as I said, I'll file away for future me.
Yeah, and if you need to, you can call me anytime.
Yeah.
Because it's so scary, and I want people's honest opinion. Like, I'm glad she
Yeah,
shared
of
that.
course.
It gave me an opportunity to understand that I believe enough in my work, and I believe enough
Mm,
in the feedback that I've received up to this point, that where it is good enough, and that's one person's opinion. And I wrote
exactly.
a book about all of my greatest failures, and I'm basically opening it up for the world to comment on. So if I can't have a thick skin on one comment, I'm in big trouble.
Yeah, it's still pretty tender though. I mean, like you said, there's a great deal of vulnerability on so many different levels that happen by, sharing pieces of you, and especially something like failure that, society programs us to feel as shameful. I can only imagine that there are extra layers of nuance and sensitivity wrapped up in there. But yeah, I think it's so important. People need this book, and one thing I am trying to remember is that, as a serial people pleaser and wanting everybody to like me, I'm realizing um, this book called Not Nice. I love and highly recommend, especially for people who are, just bent on people pleasing and saying and doing and worrying about, doing the right thing, which I think to a large extent plagues a lot of women in the US, is to remember that you're not for everyone, and you shouldn't aspire to that. And it's okay. Like, there are going to be a great many more people who are going to appreciate and need this book than there are. I mean, they can put the book down, and hopefully you won't encounter any trolls. But I think, to me, that's such a relief to think and remember, I'm not for everyone. My book is not for everyone, and nor is it trying to be. But gosh, it's really hard not to let that one comment pierce your skin, no matter how thick. So I think that's such a great example, and model for people to remember. I think in any creative pursuit, any artistic expression, it's a piece of you, even if you're writing fiction. And yeah, I mean, in some respects, I wish people would be a bit more kind to one another. But I think remembering this is your story, you are rooted in your convictions, and that's that, and you can move on.
Yeah. Well, Layla, there is one other thing I want to talk to you about.
Okay.
So back fall of last year, you and I got to work together.
Yes.
Do you want to share a little bit about that experience and what it opened up for you?
I would love to, because I wrote a personal essay for Mother Untitled, that shared more about our work together and this huge revelation and takeaway for me. And it's something that I shared in my 90 days class. And after I did my hot seat yesterday, in one of the comments, someone said, "What about the full cup is for you? Is that, that sounds like part of your story too." And so I think that it just really opened up a whole new way of looking at the world. I, like many people, went along through life thinking, it's important to replenish your cup so you can pour out for others. And I think, especially as women and mothers in particular, that is, the prescribed stock advice. And what you helped me to see and illustrated in such a beautiful metaphor is that you refill the cup and pour out for yourself first, and that it's the leftovers that others should be getting. And I think for so long, I operated on pouring out, pouring out, pouring out, waiting till my cup was virtually empty or dipping below sea level, and then refilling it. And that didn't leave any consideration for my needs or what I wanted or needed to take care of myself. And I think, you know, self-care is something that we are starting to intellectually understand as something that's important, but it's much harder to put into practice. And, you know, it was like this epiphany, mind blown moment for me and many other friends who read it. Not just moms, I think for everybody, and especially people who are caregivers or in a position where they're, you know, giving care or serving others. It's such an important thing to remember. But you know, you have the realization, but then you're also challenged on a near daily, if not daily basis to put that into practice. And I have just seen, you know, I think having that awareness and living from a more aware, conscious place, I'm able to see it and recognize it and, you know, do something about it in the moment instead of letting my cup run dry and being like, oh my God, what's wrong? How did I get here? How do I fix this? Is it me? Is this my fault? You know, spiraling. And so it's really forced me to find these ways. I use the term microdose self-care throughout the day, because it's so easy for me to just, you know, schedule things back to back to back. Pick up my daughter from school, give her all my attention, make dinner, you know, the whole thing. And so for me, that looks like meditating and drawing a card before a writing session. I like to use the Wild Unknown archetype deck because I find that particularly fruitful for thinking about story concepts. And it looks like maybe 15 minutes of yoga or a walk around the block. You know, I often forget to, you know, get up and stretch my legs. Some days, you know, it feels very indulgent to actually prepare lunch and sit down and eat it, but I am so much all the better for it. And so to bring it back to the food and connection piece of it, I think it really has taught me how to hone this awareness on what I need to feel full
Mm.
and how that manifests in ways that go beyond food. And so that I'm not substituting food as a way to feel full or to feel connected, but rather I'm really tuning in and listening to what my mind and body and soul are telling me that it needs. And yeah, sometimes it really is some delicious chocolate.
Mm.
Other times it's to snuggle with my dog. It just, I think, has really made me pay more attention to my truth and what is actually true for me and what I need, and believing that ultimately that will allow me to show up for myself to better serve others.
Layla, thank you so much for sharing that. Those particular, I think I called them energy aligning clarity sessions, I think might have
Yes.
been what I called them. And it was an hour of guided meditation, Reiki, card pull, and then an hour of coaching. And they're really a treat for me to do with folks because I feel like an hour sometimes feels too rushed. And that 2 hours as a coach for me, I feel like we can kind of really sink in. We can pause first. We
Mhm.
can slough off everything that came before and what might need to happen later in order to sink into the experience, to really get to the heart of maybe the root of the pain point that's happening
Mhm.
in someone's life. So they're a treat as a coach to get to share. And I don't always have it in my schedule to be able to offer those often. And I always find that I get just the right people in them. And
Mhm.
with you, and then you wrote that beautiful article about the experience. And and I'll link to it in the show notes so folks can go read it and check it out. And we'll link to Layla's website so y'all can check her wonderful stuff out and be on the lookout for when her memoir comes out. I know I'm hungry for it. And having that reflected back to me, it's funny, coaches I've got a coach. I think it's really important for coaches to have coaches. And sometimes, oftentimes, our clients reflect back to us what we need to hear too, right?
Mm,
So after I
yes.
read yours, I was like, man, I need a dose of my own damn medicine. I need
Yeah.
to, so it was so great to hear your words and think, gosh, well, where am I not taking care of myself? There's a lot of places I'm not taking care of myself and
Yes.
having to like recalibrate on a daily basis. So thank you for giving me my own medicine back to me.
You're welcome. It's so easy, I think, to point out or speak lovingly or show someone, uh, an advice or a truth. But yeah, often it's also what we need to hear. And so I'm really grateful that it was this collaborative, reciprocal exchange of energy and truth.
Yeah, thank you. So I've got two final questions for you. Is there
Okay.
anything else that you would like listeners to know about?
Um, I so about a year and a half ago, I guess, when I really started working on my memoir in earnest, I changed my Instagram handle. It was the glass of rosé, and it is now words underscore with underscore Layla. And I just really felt like that spoke much more to my purpose and my truth. It's made posting on Instagram harder because I choose a word and then I write sort of like a mini essay reflection on it. And, those are things that can't always be scheduled in advance, nor do I have the time really to allocate to like, quote unquote Instagram strategy, which I don't really want it to be anyway. So I'm curious to know from this community if they have a word that they would
Mm.
want to explore, or if they read something that really speaks to them, or that they would want more reflection on. I'm always curious to know. It often starts with something that's very personal for me, but resonates with a lot of people. And so if you have a word that you'd like to explore, or something that you see on my Instagram feed that you want more of, I would love to know that.
Well, I can attest to really loving your Instagram posts. I know you don't do them that often, but when you do, I always make it a point to actually I'll save it and then I'll pause to read it so that I can really take it in. And anytime I can't wait and I end up reading, I always have to go back and reread it
Oh
because
my gosh.
it's always something that I like really need to hear. So I highly recommend that folks will also link to that in the show notes, that folks
Oh.
go find you and follow you. My word of the year is emerge. So whatever you want to do with that or not.
Mm,
So that's
I love that.
yeah, I love that word too. And this is the first time I've picked a word of the year. So I've always told other people to do it, and it's the first time I've had one speak to me.
That's so wonderful. I can't wait to think about that. I mean, I think that's such a beautiful metaphor, for where you are, for where we all are, because I guess one of the big takeaways too is that we're all still emerging, and that we never really fully arrive. But if we're lucky and grateful to be living presently and full of awareness, then then we're ever closer to that. I I can't wait to explore that more.
Well, and my final question for you is, how do you live a life of abundance?
Well, I would say that I have tried to be much more diligent about my gratitude practice, and understanding that, sort of in line with, we're not trying to get somewhere, or arrive at some final destination, um, but rather we cultivate and appreciate what we already have, and then that gives rise to more abundance. And I think for me, where I am right now is I am trying to understand how I can give more. I think I'm seeing how much I've received, and I link abundance to generosity of giving.
Mm. Layla, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Alicia. What a pleasure.